Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. Please welcome Senator Scott Surovell. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Woody. Good to be here again.
About 4.5 days into the new session, how are things going for you so far?
Well, so far none of my bills have been heard, and so it's all great. Everything's still alive, so.
Well, I guess that's a good thing. And of course, the governor gave his remarks to the General Assembly, last Wednesday evening. Talk to us about some of the things he outlined.
Right. Well, the big thing he talked about is our budget, and this year's budget is actually a much bigger budget than we normally have in a off-year short session budget. You know, in Virginia we do a 2-year budget, and so in the short session, which is this year, that we do in the odd years, we do a 45-day session because we usually need to make little tweaks. But because of the federal tax reform that just happened, and because of a Supreme Court decision, and also because the state's economy is going really well, we have about an extra $1 billion to $1.2 billion to spend, and some would say some policy issues that we have to decide in connection with all that. And he focused a lot on that. I mean, what he would like to do is to see part of that money allocated to make the earned income tax credit refundable. The tax credit is something that only goes to people who work and people who's sort of at the lower end, sort of minimum wage workers. And right now, if your tax refund, if you get the earned income tax credit, is bigger than what you're owed back, you get zero. But if we were to make that tax credit refundable, it would get some money back. And from the governor's perspective, it would introduce some more fairness to our tax system, because the tax cuts mainly went to the wealthy. Virginia's income tax is really just a flat tax, and it needs some progressivity. He also wants to invest it in teacher salaries. He wants to put a slug into a little bonus for state workers who are very underpaid. They've been suffering for 9 years now and not getting paid enough. Higher education, some priorities like that. And he spent a lot of his speech talking about that. He also talked about the Equal Rights Amendment, which actually we're going to vote on today. Interestingly, it came out of committee last week, and we're going to vote it on the floor today, hopefully get that through. That's something I've actually been working on for 7 years now, 8 years. I think I put it in 7 times. So he talked a little bit about how we need to do that. What else did he talk about? He talked about Interstate 81. Not a big priority for my district, but there's some really odd parts of that deal that I think unfairly treat the people who live in the 36th Senate District who use I-95. They want to do an annual toll pass for $30, and I have people that pay $30 a day.
Right.
And they want to do a $30 a year toll pass, and that to me, we're going to have to work on that, because I can't have people in one part of the state paying $30 for the whole year and get a toll waiver, while I have people paying $30 a day, or looking at that sign saying $30 a day. It's just not fair. So he talked about that. He talked about, I think, freeing up voting, making it easier to vote, things like no excuse absentee voting.
Redistricting, I think, commission bipartisan.
Yeah, nonpartisan redistricting is going to be a big issue this year. He talked about that, and everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of us agree on nonpartisan redistricting, that it ought to happen, that legislators should not be drawing their own seats, or at least I should say those who are in the majority should not be drawing their own seats, which is how it currently works. But there's some details about how you do nonpartisan redistricting that have to be worked out. I think most of the proposals involve having a nonpartisan commission, either a bipartisan or nonpartisan commission. Some say let's let some judges draw. Others say let's let some judges pick people to draw. Other people, let's say, let's have some Democrats and Republicans and require like a supermajority to pass the districts, but we need to base these districts based on nonpartisan criteria, like make sure they're as compact as possible, they are contiguous, minimize jurisdictional splits, honor geographic boundaries like rivers and big interstates or something that divide communities, and we also, of course, have to comply with the Voting Rights Act.
And of course, this is the second time in recent history that the state is subject to judges drawing maps.
Right. Well, yeah, we had our congressional districts were set aside by the courts about, I want to say, 4 years ago, and we couldn't agree on that, and the courts had to redraw 3 of our congressional districts for us, maybe 4. The courts have just held that the House of Delegates map was illegally drawn, and we can't agree about that. We had a special session for it. It went nowhere. And so now the courts are going to redraw about 33 House of Delegates districts. For the last, 5 years, when we've had divided control of government, with the Democratic governor's mansion, Republicans controlling the legislature, we just haven't been able to come to a compromise on that. When we redrew the districts in 2011, we had unified Republican control up and down. Or actually, no, we didn't. We had the Democratic Senate, but they were able to work that out that year, although the governor did veto the bill. But yeah, we've had to have the courts do it now twice.
You mentioned a Supreme Court decision relative to the budget. Is that the internet sales tax revenue? Right. What's the impact of that? What does that all mean?
Right. Well, until last year, the Supreme Court had held that a state cannot tax a business unless that state has a nexus with your state, has a contact with your state. And so legally, we were unable to tax a lot of internet sales. We were able to tax Amazon, incidentally, because they have distribution centers in Virginia, and we were able to add them years ago. But there's a lot of companies that do business over the internet we couldn't tax. And the Supreme Court decided, it's called the Wayfair case. A lot of people might have heard of that company called Wayfair. They're the songs where people sing Wayfair and all that.
Right.
Anyways, they got sued by the state of South Dakota, and the Supreme Court held that states can now tax internet sales because of the changing nature of our economy. And originally we thought that was going to result in about an extra $300 million a year to the state. But actually, after they started looking at the number of businesses that we already have paying it, it's actually only about $150 million. And then once you take out the money that's required to go to schools, K through 12, there's some money that's required to go to roads. It gets down to about $58 million a year to the general fund after that. But we do have to pass legislation to implement it, because right now there's nothing on the books that tells the Department of Taxation or retailers exactly how to set that up and pay. So we're going to have to pass a bill about that. But I expect we will, because we just can't leave that kind of money on the table.
Weren't there 2 significant hits to the budget? One regarding Northrop Grumman contract on IT, and then the other one dealing with the current Medicaid program.
Medicaid, yeah. The Northrop Grumman contract is something that's been a mess almost since we got into it. The state has a contract with Northrop Grumman for its IT services, and it just hasn't gone well. There's been a lot of overruns. Anyways, we canceled the contract, and there was a big payment associated with that, but we needed to get out of that deal. It just wasn't a good deal. The Medicaid, though, that was a big deal. The Medicaid forecast. Medicaid is, of course, the health care program for low-income people, mainly children. About 15,000, maybe 20,000 children in my district get their health care from Medicaid. Elderly, but not as many elderly in the 36th district. And now that we've expanded Medicaid, working folks, people that make sort of under $30,000 a year with 4-person family, that kind of.
That cost overrun has nothing to do with the expansion.
Nothing. No, zero. Okay. The expansion didn't happen until January 1, just like 2 weeks ago. But the people who forecast what Medicaid is going to cost for us thought that we would get more savings out of a new managed care program that we did, and it came in that the savings weren't there, and they were off by about $300 million, which is a lot of money. I mean, that $300 million in the budget could be a huge, increased salary to teachers or something. I mean, we definitely need to figure out why our Medicaid forecasting was so far off and what we got to do to fix it. I think a lot of it probably comes from nursing home care. Kids that get their pediatrics and stuff from Medicaid, that's pretty predictable stuff. The real big cost impacts on Medicaid have always been the nursing homes. Elderly people that don't have any money, that are living in nursing homes, where Medicaid's picking up that cost. That's really what's getting us. And as more and more baby boomers age out, get as that baby slug of baby boomers hits the nursing homes. That's really been putting cost pressure on Medicaid.
Let's turn to an issue you've been working on for some time that directly affects your constituents, and that's the problem of coal ash removal.
Right.
Talk to us about what coal ash is, why it needs to be removed, and where we are.
Right. Yeah, so coal ash, it's not a very sexy issue, but a lot of people have been hearing me talk about it. But it's a big deal, mainly because it's going to be very expensive, extremely expensive to clean up. But basically, coal ash is what's left over after you burn coal. And when you burn coal, there's two things left over. There's boiler ash, which is the stuff they take out of the bottom of the furnace. There's fly ash, which is the stuff that goes up the fly, and they capture it up the smokestack. They capture it and it comes out. And in Virginia, Dominion Power was burning coal at five different sites in Virginia, one of which was in Prince William County. It's in right outside the town of Dumfries on the Potomac, the end of Quantico Creek. It's called Possum Point. And between four of the five sites that Dominion has, they have about 24 million cubic yards of this stuff, coal ash. And the way they stored it was they just basically dug a hole in the ground, put some water in it, and threw the ash in the pond in the ground, and starting in about the 1940s. And over time, they made the ponds a little bit more secure. They put, like in the ponds they built in the 1980s, they put a clay liner around part of it, not the bottom. Or they made the bottom and a little bit around the top, but not the sides. And the ponds got bigger and bigger and bigger. About 10 years ago, one of these ponds in Tennessee broke. The dam that was holding it back broke, and it created a Superfund site. All this coal ash went over all these homes and out into a river and spoiled the river. We had another spill in North Carolina, which the river comes into Virginia. And so the EPA says that we can't store it in water anymore. We have to do something else. And so for the last 3 years, I've been trying to pass legislation to do something about it, because when coal ash comes into contact with water, the heavy metals bleed out, and the water ends up having things in it like arsenic, lithium, cobalt, and hexavalent chromium, which is what made Aaron Brockovich famous, if you've ever watched that movie.
Yes.
So, and there are well tests that have been taken. Every single one of the ponds in Virginia is leaking. Every single one. All four of the big ponds are leaking. Possum Point is right there off the Potomac. The Chesterfield site sits in an old part of the Chesterfield of the James River, and it's below the water table. It's below the flood. A flooded river could come in and just wipe it, take it in. The Chesapeake site is down in Chesapeake, Virginia. A hurricane could impact that one, and we have another one out near Charlottesville, Buckingham County, which is a problem. And so the bill I put in, which is actually the governor's bill, would ask that Dominion recycle as much of this ash as possible. We don't want to cap it in place. We don't want to leave it where it is. That was Dominion's original plan. They just wanted to leave it where it was and put a big rubber thing over it and cross their fingers and hope that nothing else leaches out. The bill we have says you got to take it out, recycle it. You can make it into bricks. You can make it into concrete. We're actually importing coal ash from outside the United States right now to make concrete, because we don't have enough of it here in the U.S. since we stopped burning coal. And so I'd like to see us use that Virginia coal ash to make products here in Virginia, create some jobs, stop importing ash from out of state, and clean the environment while we're at it. And I think that the bill has an excellent chance of passing this year, but it's going to be incredibly expensive. We're talking, and it's about an extra $500 million to an extra $2.5 to $3 billion to do recycling versus leaving it in the ground. And people who pay their electric bills are going to have to pay for that over about a 25 year period. And so we're working out the details of that right now, but I'm pretty optimistic about it.
So will that require Dominion, for example, to haul that out with trucks? Is there going to be impact on traffic and that kind of thing as well?
You've been reading the paper, I guess. So that's partly what we're working on. Dominion says that if we, depending on which recycling method we use, if we do the method where we turn this stuff into an additive to make concrete, it's about 300 trucks a day at the Chesterfield site. It's about 110 trucks a day at the Possum Point site, which works out to about 1 million trucks, 1 million truck trips at Possum over, I don't know, a 15-year period. And my constituents, as well as Senator Dance's and the constituents who live around Chesterfield, would rather see us use rail to get those products out. And so, for example, if we made bricks instead of this concrete additive, they could get the bricks out by rail. Every one of these sites has a railhead because that's how the coal got in there. So that's some of the details we're working on. Actually, in 15 minutes, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to a coal ash meeting. We're going to be talking about some of those details, but we're trying to minimize truck traffic.
What about, you indicated ratepayers are going to have to bear the cost primarily. Anybody have a conservative figure on how high rates may go up?
Well, to do nothing, that is to do the cap in place plan, Dominion's plan costs about $1.7 billion. And that would have about $1 to $1.30 rate impact per month after about 20 years, after 15 or 20 years. To do the recycling piece, you're talking about adding on between another 50 cents to another $2 a month to do it right, to make sure we have clean groundwater and to create those jobs. And again, that's over a 15-year period. So those are the kinds of numbers I think we're talking about, although we haven't done a real precise analysis of it.
So what committee is this bill in?
Commerce and Labor. Well, it's in ag right now, agriculture
Right.
and natural resources, but it's going to get transferred to the Commerce and Labor Committee.
Good chance of passage?
I think so. I mean, now it's the governor's bill, and I have some Republican colleagues that are supporting me on it, and they want to see something done. It's not a really hasn't really been a partisan issue. It's really been more of a regional issue, and some legislators are affected and some aren't. And of course, anybody that turned a light bulb on in the last 20 years helped make this problem. So it's really a problem for everybody.
Predatory lending, I know that's been a huge issue for you over the years.
Yeah. So I got a couple bills on that this year. I have one bill that would impose a 36% rate cap on the consumer finance industry, which is a specific type of license that's issued for certain types of companies in Virginia. Right now, they have no rate cap on their loans, and the legitimate companies do all their loans at 36% or less. And they're asking us to put a rate cap on them, because what's happening is that some of these internet lenders are coming in from out of state and asking to be added to that license. And these are people that make loans over the internet. Right now, you can go online, you go on Google, and you type Quick Virginia Cash. You can get a loan on the internet with no credit check for up to $3,000 at interest rates around 400%.
400%.
400%. And we are trying to pass this cap to make sure that these lenders don't try and use this specific act. If the internet lenders want to have their own act, they can do that. But we've also had these internet lenders now that are using Indian tribes. They make contracts with Indian tribes to make a contract through the tribe that's subject to tribal law, tribal arbitration. And so that if you want to sue them, you have to go to arbitration with the chief of the tribe in like New Mexico or Arizona or North Dakota or someplace. And they're making loans again, 300, 400. I think some people have even seen loans as high as 1,000% interest once you add in the fees and the monthly fees and the initial processing fee and all that kind of stuff. So it's a increasing sort of scourge. I also have a bill that I'm co-sponsoring with the Minority Leader Saslaw to put consumer protections on open-end credit arrangements, which is another loophole. There's no interest rate cap on that. There's no consumer protections. But a lot of these companies, once we put consumer protections on like car title loans or payday loans, they switched over to these open-end credit lines. So they say, we'll give you a credit line at 300% or a credit line at 400% without any of the consumer protections on it. And so we're doing a bill to re-regulate those.
How's Route 1 doing in your district these days? I know that's something you've been working on for quite a while.
Yeah, it's actually there's been a lot of progress on that, Woody. So first of all, Prince William County has already widened, I think, 2 or 3 stretches of Route 1 to 6 lanes. They've got another widening that's currently under construction. We also just got about $48 million from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to fund a widening through Dumfries. We needed about another $50 million. Hopefully we'll get that actually in a couple of days from the Commonwealth Transportation Board to finish funding the Dumfries widening. Fairfax County, there's some also really exciting things going on. Senator Poehler and I pushed a study through back in 2011, which recommended a metro extension, bus rapid transit, and a widening. The Fairfax County endorsed that, just finished the zoning and planning for that, and we just got about $350 to $400 million from the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to start the land acquisition and the construction on that. We're about still, it's crazy to think, but we're still 7 years from the road being open. But they're starting the condemnation process. They're finalizing engineering right now. We still need about another $200 or $300 million from the feds. We're hoping that the Federal Transit Administration funds the rest of the bus rapid transit piece, and some more money from the state. But you couple these big transportation and these big infrastructure investments with what's going on at Amazon, I think the Route 1 corridor is really poised to take off as being one of the most exciting, sort of highest growth areas in Northern Virginia over the next probably decade or two. So I'm really excited about what's been going on. And you're right, I've been working on it for 9 years, and it's crazy to think you have to work that long to pull some of these things off, but that's kind of how the government works.
Sure. So I assume you've done your own cost-benefit analysis in terms of Amazon and the amount of money the state had to come up with,
Right.
and it's a positive, I assume, as far
yeah.
as you're concerned.
Yeah, I mean, they're bringing in all these jobs. They're bringing in, on average, six-figure jobs. I think 25,000 jobs that pay that kind of money. You can't turn that down. The benefit, the tax revenue it brings, the economic growth that it brings, I think are is undeniable. And the deal that was cut ensures that taxpayers won't pay a penny until the jobs are created. We're not prepaying anything. So I think that they estimate that taxpayers are going to get their money back within, I think, 3 or 4 years of putting it out once these jobs are created. So I think it was a fair deal.
What impact is it going to have on the housing market? I saw some numbers earlier on that suggested condos and townhomes are just going to explode in terms of value.
Yeah, it's going to create a lot of pressure on housing prices, especially in the 36th district, because we're just 4 miles south of where this thing's going in, and it really brings home how much the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors needs to get its act together on affordable housing. They have not had a real affordable housing program, or at least one they put any money behind, which is what you need, for the last 2 decades. And Northern Virginia's gonna have to pick up the pace and start putting some actual money into affordable housing. And that's a real problem in the Route 1 corridor where I represent, because the last thing we want to see is a bunch of people pushed out as part of this project. Also, remember I mentioned this a second ago, if we want to get the yellow line extended, if we want to get this bus rapid transit built with this federal money, the federal government says you can't take their money unless you can show no net loss of affordable housing. And so we can't do any of this redevelopment without showing there's going to be a place for people to live after it's done. And the only way it's going to happen is with taxpayer dollars invested in affordable housing.
Of course, what's ironic is that the federal government's not doing a thing to encourage low-income housing either.
No, they're not. It's not really a priority of this administration, and the current Secretary of HUD doesn't really believe, I think, in government involvement in housing, but government's been involved in housing since the Great Depression. I mean, we didn't have 30-year mortgages until the federal FHA came in and started guaranteeing mortgages when people met certain criteria. So we definitely need some more federal activity on that. We definitely need their resources.
How is this shutdown affecting your constituents? Do you have a lot of federal employees in your district?
Yeah, I think, according to the census, I think about 4 in 10 people who live in the 36th district work for the government. Not necessarily the federal government. Right. It could be, you could be talking about teachers and police or firefighters, but a lot of them work for the federal government. I also have a lot of active duty military in my district. But there's definitely some federal work. I've had some friends tell me that husbands and wives are at home. Actually, I was just walking to the hardware store Sunday with one of my neighbors who told me he was trying to retire, and they couldn't process his retirement paperwork. But there's a lot of people that it's really hurting who just can't work. I mean, I was shocked this weekend that the National Park Service staff actually got the roads brined, the George Washington Memorial Parkway brined, they got it plowed, they fixed some potholes, and they weren't getting paid. But they're out there working, doing their job without getting paid, and I think we've started to see that, at TSA, people started not to show up. I think you're going to see people at TSA just quit their jobs pretty soon and go on to something else, and we're going to have long lines at airports and things for a while recovering from this when the dam ever breaks. But in Northern Virginia, it's actually across the whole state. Hampton Roads, there's plenty of government contractors as well. It's really going to, I think we're going to see a hit on our budget eventually once the sort of dust clears from this.
And those government contractors don't necessarily get back pay either.
No, they don't. The contractors especially don't. The government workers Congress passed a bill, I think, that President Trump promised to sign that would guarantee that workers would get back pay, but the contractors don't. And I had people call me after the last shutdown that had for example, they had got sued for evictions and other things because they couldn't pay their rent for a month or two after that happened because they got laid off. Sometimes they lay these people off for like 2 or 3 months until the government, even after the shutdown's over, before they can get them back.
Yeah, and evictions have become a big problem in the state of Virginia as well, mostly low income, and
Yeah.
I know that's something that's being addressed as well.
Yeah, we got a couple bills this year to sort of bring some balance back to our landlord-tenant process. In Virginia, it's very easy to evict somebody. It's actually not a very good state to be a tenant in. It's a great state to be a landlord in. But in Virginia, it's almost too easy to evict somebody. And there's a few bills, I think, increasing the period of time after which somebody doesn't pay and you give them notice that they can cure, and I think they can cure before making it easier to cure before the judge enters an order. There's some things like that coming through the system which I think are needed and overdue.
School resource officers, I know that's something you're working on as well. Talk
Right.
to us a little bit, though, about K through 12, how those school resource officers and other support staff are needed. And I know the school resource officers have become a subject of a lot of criticism because they're not used to dealing with those kids, and they are more apt to refer them to a criminal prosecution.
Right. So, you know, when I went to West Potomac High School, I graduated in 1989. We didn't have a police officer in the building. We didn't have an SRO. I never saw a police officer at any of my schools the whole way through. Now we have a school resource officer at my children's high school, West Potomac, where I went. They have them at the intermediate school, and that's pretty much the case all throughout the 36th Senate District, all the way down to Stafford County. I think by bringing police into the schools, it results in a lot more kids being charged with crimes than ought to be. Virginia actually leads the country in putting kids in the school to prison pipeline.
Leads the country.
We're number one. It's not a place we want to be number one in. And I've seen some significant abuse of the system. For example, last year or 2 years ago, we had a child in Dumfries in my district who was charged with petty larceny for stealing a carton of milk. And this kid was on the free and reduced lunch program. And he got charged with stealing $1 carton of milk. Charge was dropped eventually, but it never should have been charged. If, to the extent there was anything there, it was a behavioral issue. I've had clients I've had to represent charged with disorderly conduct for hiding under a school bus seat. 7th grader.
Wow.
That just shouldn't happen. They shouldn't have to call a lawyer and hire me and pay me money to come and defend them. It's a behavioral issue. So I put in a bill this year which basically takes the Fairfax County Memorandum of Understanding with the police department and the school board, which the Fairfax County just revised theirs last year, and basically applies that to the entire state. And it basically requires diversity training, requires police to go through certain diversity and cultural awareness training now and then every 3 years or so. So we have police officers that understand the kids that they're actually policing. It says that police cannot be involved in discipline. They're only involved in crimes. It says that parents have to be called before a child's questioned or searched. It requires interpreters to be used. So I'm hoping that will bring some balance back to that process.
Great. Well, thank you for being here, Senator Scott Surovell. Good to see you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I am Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.